Welcome everybody to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO of GoLocal. It is Business Monday. Who do we have? Cha-ching! The money man, Gary Sass. Bitcoins went crashing today. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see it.
Well, you ought to check in with your financial people because that probably cost you, I don't know, 100 million, 50 million, whatever the money man's impacted.
I clip coupons.
What is your position in Bitcoins? How much of your overall portfolio?
Zero. Zero.
Do you call it portfolio when you have that much wealth accumulated?
I call it my wife's bank account.
Let's see. Just about everything is happening. Last week was, it was like that period of time about 3 weeks before an election where everything is going kerplooey. Let's start with the governor's race, then we'll go to the state budget. Last week, Governor Raimondo had as difficult a week as a candidate can have. Lawyers misfiling things or failing to file things, fundraisers exposed with questionable hosts, just lots of things, and it just piled up on her. And then John Della Volpe's poll for GoLocal comes out, and she's in a dead heat with Alan Fung. What's your take on all this?
Well, you know, it's tough when the smartest person in the room makes mistakes all the time. I think, you know, she is so focused on her national context, focused on her race, you know, focused on trying to attract business to the state, that she forgets that the first job of the governor is to make sure the state is well run. And there just have been too many, it's a cumulative effect. There have just been too many snafus. Each one by itself is just a mistake, but you have UHIP, and then we had lawyers not being licensed. We have a press conference that we're doing personnel reform, you know, 3 years into the administration. I was head of Lincoln Almond's transition, and if my memory serves me right, we spoke about personnel reform in the first State of the State, you know, address.
It's a little hard to talk about personnel reform after you just signed a multi-year extension of a contract with the largest union as well.
Right, and that's another thing. People, you know, begin to see. I think that contract probably over the 2 years probably cost about $40 million.
Yep, that's what the speaker says.
About $40 million that was unbudgeted. So there's a kind of anxiety, unease. Not about people's personal situation, but they don't see the state, you know, being run well. So each time there's another little bump in the road, and some of them, frankly, are bumps. Some are really major snafus. It causes a lot of scrambling and a lot of rejustification, and that's reflected in the fact that any poll that I've seen, you know, has her no higher than 40%. Last time she won the election as a minority governor, and it just continues. Public confidence in her stewardship is what comes into question. And if the Republicans that have a chance, or the independents to have a chance, then you really have to hit very hard on the stewardship.
Let's go to the issue of sort of competency. You know, when she was running for office, I think the one thing you'd mark off in the box would be competency, right? Gina Raimondo, highly educated, high performer type of person. You may or may not have agreed with her on pension reform or on other issues, but I think she would have gotten in most measures competency. Is this really undercutting these problems? And also, I think it scratches at people on exactly how she responds. It's this little lawyer's fault. It's this person's fault, rather than taking on and being responsible for these things. Is this something she can reverse? You've been through a lot of these. You've worked for almost every governor in the last 25, 30 years in one role or another. Is this something she can turn around over the next 3.5, 4 months?
Well, a lot
4 or 5
of
months?
the ability to turn something around depends upon, you know, what your opposition says and what your opposition does. It's harder to turn around those things if there's a very strong opponent. 3 months as an attorney in politics, you know, a number of good things can happen to draw people's attention away from what happened in the middle of June, you know, certainly in November. So yeah, I think this can be turned around. But what is the problem. It's not a one-time event that, okay, we screwed up and we weren't making sure that our lawyers were properly licensed. Honest mistake. It's accumulation, as I mentioned, of things, which wear on people's minds. So they're going to have to perform a lot better. The concern too, and Gina, I wouldn't touch the competency question, with a long stick, because she's a smart, capable woman. So I assume she's, competent for the job. Question I have is, what kind of job is she doing in managing the people that she appoints? And what kind of communications is there between her directly and key cabinet officials? What role do the deputy chiefs of staff have and the staffs have in relating to the government? So it becomes a question of trust and not necessarily being hands-on. I'm not on the inside, so I can't answer those questions, but oftentimes when a governor, and we've elected, most of the governors we've elected were intelligent, capable people, but the mistakes happen when you appoint people to offices who are not professionally qualified. And a big problem, with UHIP, with the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, with the agencies under that, is several of the appointments have been political appointments. The first appointment to run the Department of Human Service was a clear political
Former Lieutenant Governor Elizabeth Roberts.
No, I'm talking about the woman that was head of DHS, Department of Human Services. She was a Democratic operative, essentially. Elizabeth had some experience in health policy, but she had administered a large department. And so there are certainly, people that run departments that are doing an exceptional job and are very well qualified. But in some of the key positions, there are people with less experience. There are questions involved. Are you letting your cabinet people do their job? Education is a good example. We have an education commissioner, competent professional guy, low-key, but competent. But it's a question of who's in charge.
Right.
Is it somebody in the governor's office that's calling the shots? Is the governor calling the shots? Is the commissioner? These are kinds of, I don't want to get into weeds, but these are the kinds of issues.
Let's talk about it from a standpoint of Alan Fung, Mayor of Cranston, Republican. Looks to be now a little bit like the leading GOP candidate. Definitely got some separation from Patricia Morgan in the polling results. How does he take advantage of this, and what's the danger of him trying to overplay the hand?
Well, he has to, first of all, when you say he's developed some daylight from Patricia, it's very difficult to poll a Republican primary.
100%.
Because you never know who's going to come or how many of them are going to come. I can remember working with Ron Makeley when Link Almond beat him, and we were having great policy discussions, and John Holmes was organizing the hell out of the people who come to vote. So it's when you say one in that small,
You've had contested Republican gubernatorial primaries with 30,000 votes, and as high as Makeley versus Almond has 60,000 votes.
Right.
So you have really no idea what that vote's going to be.
Yeah, so until, our primary is finished and we know who the, candidate is, it's an even playing field. We'll see what happens. So, but as far as, Alan and Patricia's concerned, they have to certainly point out what the mistakes have been. They have to continue when there's a problem to put it in the proper context. But at the same time, people want, and they have to also defend their records. So when you throw bricks, make sure you're not living in a glass house.
Right.
And understand what.
Well, you got to expect that Governor Raimondo's team is going to be firing back very aggressively over the next few weeks.
And I think that benefits the Republicans and Allen specifically, because Governor Raimondo's claim to fame, she says, is the work she's been doing on economic development.
Right.
So if the campaign becomes an argument over government efficiency or government effectiveness, then that favors the
challenger.
The challenger, absolutely.
How big a trouble for the Republicans is Joe Trillo? It really looks, if you dig into those numbers, that he has captured a significant portion of the Trump base.
It's a big problem, and Republicans are in denial if they think it's not a big problem. And you don't have to look at Rhode Island. Around the country, Maine's one example, the others. There have been governors elected as minority governors. By that I mean they didn't get 50% of the vote. And so when you're the out party, when you're a considerably smaller party than the in party, and a third candidate gets on the ticket, unless they're very unique circumstances, it has to affect you. We saw that with Healy, last time, got 20% of the vote. And so if the poll is correct and Trillo's getting it 16% of the vote, that is a big issue. And it's a big issue for a couple of reasons. Even though the poll suggests it's a dead heat, and it's very close. Within the margin of error, it's very close. One candidate has $4 million to spend to drive up that number. And if you started out at 33% and you had $4 million and you couldn't drive your number to 40%, then a lot of political operatives should be sued for
malpractice.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is an issue. It's not just Joe Trillo. It's Joe Trillo or Healy, whoever it was. When you have a known third-party candidate, just the DNA it causes extra work for the out party and the minority party.
It sure looks like it's breaking that way early on. Joe Trillo's somewhere between, however you want to look at it, between 14 and 18% on most of the questions. It looks like, and it makes sense. People say, well, he hasn't spent any money. He's got Donald Trump's mailing list. Donald Trump got almost 40% of the vote in Rhode Island. He's bombards with emails. He launches issues, white papers on different issues 1, 2, 3 times a week. They're very Trump-esque in voice, and you can certainly see how he could capture 40%, 50% of that Trump vote come November if he stays in this race.
Well, the key thing is turnout.
Right. And
we really don't know what the turnout is of those people. But the Trump factor is real. A large percentage of the Republican Party backs Trump up. They're not my kind of Republican. They're not traditional conservative Republicans, but people that vote Republican, large percentage support Trump. As you pointed out, we got 40% of the vote in key, districts, probably in the 2nd Congressional District and in the West. So it's a factor, and how Alan and Pat work on containing that, getting those people to vote, back in the party is really important. But there's another, and this is why it's so difficult, there's another devil in the detail. It's how do you pivot? Trump's going to make it much harder for Republican candidates to pivot. And so when a Republican runs to win the primary and has to worry about the Trump voter, coming out, then you get into the general, where the state is a little more moderate or a little more reasoned, I say, than Trump is on some things. It's a difficult thing.
There's much more animosity between Joe Trillo and Alan Fung. It's no secret. Joe Trillo will say it. He'll say it on the record. Does he send his supporters out to vote in the Republican primary for Patricia Morgan?
I don't know. I don't know what the backroom politics are. They're all kind of conspiracy theories. I don't.
You're anti-conspiracy theory?
Well,
or you're pro-conspiracy theory?
They're fun, but I try not to talk about things I don't know a whole lot about.
Let's go to the budget. Friday night, we had the pleasure of being up at the State House with the Speaker and Chairman Abney and Majority Leader Sicarci at about 10, 11 o'clock on a Friday night. A great way to spend a Friday evening in beautiful Rhode Island. And the Speaker outlined the budget. You've gotten a peek at some of the top lines of it. How would you grade this budget? Usually what comes out of House Finance is what gets passed?
Pretty much the case. Well, I find it interesting. Just one aside. I got to be careful how I grade a budget because I haven't read it.
Okay.
And that's like a student turning in a term paper. You throw A on it because
there's always a budget article that somebody hasn't quite paid enough attention to.
And what distinguishes me from members of the legislature is they vote for it without reading it. You ask me to comment on it without reading it, so I want to be a little more cautious than they are. I certainly would not give it a high grade. And the reason I would not give it a high, I wouldn't give it a failing grade either. But The reason I would not give it a high grade is it's a typical garden variety election year budget.
C plus kind of budget?
I don't even think it's that high, but it's I'm not.
C?
I'm not going to grade give it.
We
you know,
like grade. You're the head of a whole academic center at
yeah.
Bryant University. You don't give grades. You
I
should
can't-
go to Brown and
I-
do everything pass fail.
I-
You're at Bryant University. This is a university that gives grades.
I give grades after I read the paper.
No, after the TA reads the paper.
We
Stop.
read grades after we look at the work. But there are a couple of things about the budget, and I'll tell you why I give it a low grade. So I don't know if it's a C minus or a D yet. So I have to look at it. But it's a typical, as I was saying, it's a typical election year, budget. It was fortuitous. They were lucky. There was an uptick in revenue, so they were able to use that revenue to fill holes. And trying to make people happy. It's election year. You don't want to make people mad.
Right.
And so the hospitals, the DD, the developmentally disabled community,
Got restored in full.
got restored in full. Some of the items that the governor had proposed, the $250 million school bond issue. They were able to fund a rather generous labor contract that the governor negotiated, which will cost about $40 million. So labor's happy. They did not eliminate many of Commerce RI's programs. They kind of maintained. They didn't give them the new programs,
Right.
but they maintained the status quo. So as you go,
Scoops were restored, except for one.
except most of the scoops were 18 million of scoops. About 14 million, was restored, which was the responsible thing to do. So you look at the budget and you say, okay, are there things in the budget that are fiscally problematic? And I'll get to those. Yes, there are. Are there things in the budget that are politically problematic? And with the exception of the nursing homes, the answer is no, because I think most of the interests came out of the budget better than they went into the budget. Certainly, it'd improve it over the governor's budget. And I think the governor would have done the same thing if she had the money. She didn't have the money, and the money materialized.
During the course of the year, as we've had conversations with everybody from the governor to Mike DeBaise to the Speaker of the House, they've all said, hey, listen, we have some fundamental problems. It's not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. They've almost all said it. And here we go, another budget cycle, really just passing the exact same budget that we've had
No, it's worse than that. And we do have a spending problem. And I just went through a litany of things that we spent money on. Each one you could defend on its own.
Sure.
But at the bottom line, we added $221 million to the governor's budget request. State spending is probably going up almost twice inflation, about 3.8%.
almost as bad as colleges and universities.
No, it's better college and university. Except there's something called the sticker price at a college is like the sticker price on a car. There's a lot of aid that goes on, but that's for all colleges. But and at this point, I don't know what the future consequences are of these current decisions. It's unfortunate that in passing out the budget material, the leadership didn't show what the 5-year forecast would be. They wouldn't have had a complete forecast, but they certainly could have had a back of the envelope forecast. So we added $221 million to the budget. The economy is growing strong, but even their own economic forecasts that we use to do the revenue estimates show a slowdown in some of the middle years. So we don't know, and this is where the fiscal responsibility question hits the road. It's not clear that they're passing a budget, and I would bet you $1 to a dime that of the 113 members of the legislature, most have no clue as to what this budget means for the future fiscal soundness of the state.
From having been there, I would say the Speaker said some nice things about the budget, but did not seem to be wonderfully enthused about it. The governor's office issued no statement on the House budget. Nothing, not a word. And the Senate president didn't issue a statement on the budget. Fairly remarkable. I'll also add in, neither did either GOP minority leaders. The Republican Party, I think, on Monday finally sent something out. But crickets.
Well, that's interesting. I can't, explain that, but my sense is that there's nothing outstanding. That there are liabilities in the budget that we don't know specifically. They're good political news, with the exception of a set of nursing homes, that a lot of the cuts that people were concerned about have been restored. But still, there are a number of things. You know, they've got $23 million for gambling, sports betting rather. It's still in debate as to whether or not, you know, there's the authority there. Lottery says they do have the authority, and I have tremendous respect for Jerry Auburn and the people that run the lottery. So, but you know, that's been talked about.
It also seems highly, and maybe, could be wrong, that they're going to hit that October 1 deadline to be able to get sports betting off the ground. I'm sure that Twin River was gearing up even before the Supreme Court decision in some mode of planning, but that's a pretty quick turnaround to institute a dramatic transformation of the entire gaming strategy of the state.
Well, they've been working at it, and I think that I think that you're going to see more amendments to the budget on the implementation of sports betting. I don't think what was presented really.
Will we see an uptick in unemployment due to bookies being put out of business? Will bookies be piling into DLT?
Bookies were offline anyhow. They're under the table, so we'll really never know the answer to that question. But you know, that's an issue. I think the amount of debt's of concern. When you include the other debt in addition to the school funding, it's $367 million, and then the governor says in a few years we'll come back with another $250 million. I'm not sure where that debt capacity, you know,
and
is.
neither party at federal or state level seems to be even slightly concerned about debt these days.
Except there's one difference. Federal government doesn't have a capital budget.
Right.
States do have capital budgets. States have a big number in their operating budget called debt service to fund the capital budget. And so if debt service begins to take too large a portion of general revenue,
Right.
If debt becomes a factor of income that's unsustainable economically, states are hit by that. Federal government just prints more paper or
Right.
does what it has to do.
Sells more stuff to China.
Yeah, so the question is really the long-term fiscal soundness, and I don't have information to say, you know, what that is, but the out-year forecast we spoke about, the huge amount of debt that's being requested, the restaurant. This is another example. I think it was fine to restore money for the hospitals, but the governor can't go around and saying she's balancing this budget in part. And there was a story in the New York Times, which I argued with a reporter about you know, Rhode Island's you know, revenue revenue budget being strengthened by Medicaid reform. When you're restoring, you know, this kind of money and not, you know, dealing with the issue. So we've restored our human service money. Medicaid is the biggest driver of the budget. We don't know what the out-year forecast is. It hasn't been made public. There's large amounts of debt, and so we'll see what happens. And then on the other side, there were some, and these are nuisances. They're more like fleas and bees, but the sales tax expansion. I find it curious that we want to become the high-tech capital of the world, and we're increasing the sales tax on, you know, certain services. So if you buy GoToMeeting, or you buy 365 Office or Salesforce, you pay a sales tax on that now, and it doesn't produce a lot of money. You know, that coupled with the tax on security services probably produces about 14 million. But do you really want to be doing those things right now? Well,
and it'll also only hurt smaller businesses in Rhode Island. If you're a national firm, you're just not going to buy those Salesforce via Rhode Island. Your sales team will still have access to it, but it won't generate any revenue here in Rhode Island. And if you're a local company that utilizes Salesforce, you'll take the full brunt of it, of the additional tax.
Yeah. Also, they didn't clean up 9/11. They gave them another $1 million and changed the name to a public safety, you know, fee.
Right.
I don't think that's going to fool the feds for very long.
Anybody a winner in this budget? Anybody a loser? Big winner or big loser?
Oh, I think there are several winners in the budget. I think the medical hospitals won. I think the developmentally disabled community won. I think education, though they didn't win a lot in terms of the operating budget, because this is a number no one's focused on. General state aid is gone up about $6.5 million. Increase for charter schools has gone up $7 million. So charter schools did well, but $6 million in increase in general aid is not a lot of money.
Above the formula.
Above the formula, yes, it increased. But I think the winners too for people that are concerned, which we all are, about the school infrastructure. I think that bond issue is a win. so the winners are the social service, the health and human service community. They got a lot restored. The one thing they did that I think was fiscally sound was they got rid of most of the scoops. I think that was positive. So like any budget, there's good, there's bad, and there's ugly. But and so when you sit around and you analyze budgets and you look at budgets that have passed in even-numbered years, when additional money gets back in, you try to use that money so you're back in as well, and that's what this budget is largely about.
Down in Washington, anything we should know about? Any big issues? It seems to be all sort of global and Trumpified.
Oh, well, yeah. One issue that may resurface is as you go around the country, there's a lot of concern about health care and the cost of health care. So I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I know there are people beginning to look at that
On both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, both sides of the aisle. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been working on, and some work will be published shortly, is how do you get people to reach across the aisle? How do you do things on a bipartisan basis? Because everything that when you do things on this hyper-partisan basis, there's a lack of certainty. Issues don't get resolved. So we passed.
Well, and also you get these big swings, right? You get Obamacare, you get no Obamacare. Well,
that's exactly
Obamacare
right.
wasn't perfect, and no Obamacare is not perfect.
The swing is the big issue.
Yeah.
And then when you run into a problem, you don't have the political support to just make mid-course corrections. And every major piece of legislation I've ever been associated with required corrections. So that is there, but there's a lot of angst in the House right now with with Paul Ryan leaving. Quietly, the Senate's doing a pretty good job in confirming nominees to the circuit court. When Trump goes, you're going to find a lot of Trump appointees on the courts. I won't comment if it's better or worse, but some people will be happy with that.
Some Republicans are definitely happy. As always, I want to thank the Money Man. Great insights. Cha-ching. For a guy who doesn't read the budget, he knows a lot about the budget. And I've got to send a missive to President Makeley about your new pass-fail IRA magazine or curriculum that you're implementing at Bryant University, where there's no letter grades.
No, we have grades, hard work, and performance is rewarded.
We're going to be right back in a minute. I want to thank the Money Man, Gary Sass. We'll be right back in 1 minute with Saul Kaplan from Business Innovation Factory. We're going to be talking about innovating state government. Is that even possible here in Rhode Island? Thanks, everybody. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I am Josh Fenton. It is Business Monday, and I've got with me Saul Kaplan, Mr. Innovation, Big family anniversary, 39-year wedding anniversary. Susan Kaplan is a saint. The woman is a saint.
She is indeed.
She's the first Jewish saint.
She says, I don't know if she's the first Jewish saint, but she is a saint. She says, even though nominally it's 39 years, she says it's really 17 years with all the strategy consulting travel I did, all the years I was on a plane traveling all over the place. Only 17 elapsed.
Only 17 actual years, right?
Yeah,
right.
no, but really fortunate, really great. We had the kids around this weekend, kind of nice.
Not bad.
Thanks.
Or it's 280 years in dog years, right? Times 7 or something that. Let's talk. Last week was, as Gary and I were talking about, as chaotic a political week as it literally was one of those weeks that's 3 weeks before the election, not 4.5, 5 months before the election. Yeah. It was just complete chaos. But one of the things that came out of it was a pretty serious issue, which was this, I don't know, unruliness of state government seemed to get exposed. And this lack of accountability, and it's not my fault, it's her fault, and it's not his fault, it's their fault. That you can't even have a lawyer in a state agency able to track a $24 million lawsuit with any efficiency. It's rare. I won't say it can't happen in the private sector, but that's a tough thing to absorb. It's a tough thing for a small business person to understand how something like that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It is political season, so this stuff tends to always happen. Then it always tends to come out. These things get leaked. They get a big spotlight on them.
Sure.
But it's not to say that there aren't challenges and problems that happen in any large organization, and it's as much about how you deal with them and put in place the systems so that the problems don't recur than it is for me about the political debate about magnifying every mistake that gets made in a incredibly large government with lots of agencies. I mean, you can imagine that there's always something that happens. The question is, are you getting a good flow of information? Are you waiting for problems to get worse before you do something because you don't want people to know about them? So I think if these things happen and you deal with them and you deal with them well and you put systems in place so that they don't happen again, then we can move through them. But of course they get amplified in the silly season as we head into
absolutely. But it did seem to be extra, and there were 2 of them in a week.
No, that's
so
a lot in a
you
short
look
period of time.
And by the way, just before you came on, Tori texted me, "You've got a $24 million lawsuit and a judgment because you guys didn't respond to something." I don't know. It just doesn't seem like that could happen over at Biff. No, with some degree, there's much more care, much more interest, much more, to some degree, interest in the business, customer service to it, etc. Is government falling so far behind the rest of the economy that these embarrassments are just horrifying to the vast majority of the public?
I don't know if I linked those 2 things together, but clearly, if we talk about innovation in government, right? How do we keep getting better? How do we get better faster? How do we use technology, right, to do it efficiently and in service of good citizen service and value? And no, government doesn't keep up, right? We're not as proactive as we need to be, and a lot of that is because there's a lot of vested interest in the way it works today. That's true in all institutions. That's true in the private sector as well. But it really tends to be true in the public sector. And you see it. This was budget week, so you see it during the budget week because you know that it's all about protecting programs and the way we've always done it. There's very little room for doing anything new. Right. And it's the same.
But it also doesn't attract people who want to innovate, right? Isn't that part of the problem?
Well, that's the other.
If I'm coming out of MIT right? And I'm that guy or that woman. Am I really going to work for the state government of Rhode Island? No, not in a million years.
Is it the place where you're going to learn, how to continually improve an enterprise, how to continue to deliver more customer value? It should be. As citizens, we want it to be. So yeah, we need to make innovation more central.
How many recent I'm going to say URI engineering, Brown engineering, or MIT engineering grads have joined Rhode Island state government in the last 10 years? 0, 1, DOT might have grabbed a couple.
Well, listen, people who go into public service. Let's not just talk about the bureaucratic jobs. The people who try to dedicate a portion of the career and they work in public service are doing it for the right reasons. Yeah. Right. The question is, can you hold on to them and can you attract real talent people, not just to run for office, but to come in leadership roles in some of these agencies? I think it's an interesting conversation to say, can we attract the talent to solving some of the real problems that we have in state government, and we can do a lot better, right? Are they environments where you have the degrees of freedom to try new things, to improve things, right? As opposed to just pedaling the bicycle of the way it has always worked. Because if that's true, who wants to be there, right? The people who want to be there are people that want to get good jobs, stay below the radar, and retire, in one of these bureaucracies or
30 years
agencies,
later. Right? One of the things that made no sense to me, or even speaks to how much government has fallen back, is we both worked in this, had stints in Rhode Island state government. Right. I worked under 3 governors and 5 directors at DEM. As a matter of practice, the chief legal counsel, and there were a number of them during my tenure, would meet with senior staff and go through all the pending legislation. So this idea that one rogue attorney in one department had complete control over a $24 million lawsuit and could delete emails and not notify people seems highly unlikely to me, that the system is so failed that the department would have absolutely no way to track massive pieces of litigation. Just doesn't seem, and the reaction also seems, if Governor Raimondo was at Village Ventures or Point Judith Capital and her law firm made a mistake costing $24 million, I'm not sure just the associate at that law firm would be switched off her account. It would be, it's 1, you're fired, law firm, and 2, I'm going to sue you, law firm. Would probably be the 2 next steps.
Yeah, well, I think, there's no question that, they react very quickly, right? But the real question is, why didn't they have the information beforehand, whether it was in the agency, or up in the executive office? Right, and so this goes to what you're talking about. This goes to, is the information flow there? Do we have the ability to track the legal matters across all of state government, right? So that you literally get the warning signs.
Does the next governor need to embody, you hate to do these catchphrases, right? And these, blue chip groups that come together. But does it need an audit? Does Rhode Island state government need an innovation audit? And to go and identify these things and start to be able to look at how things move through state government, how they can be improved, rather than this one's a little bit of an innovator over here at DLT and that one over at Health, kind of sticking his toe in the water.
This should go on. It shouldn't be dependent on coming in and doing.
Should they all be required to go to BIF?
This should happen as an ongoing. What you're talking about shouldn't be, let's do an audit, right? Or wait till there's a problem, because then what happens is a problem bubbles up, right? And we fix it,
right?
And then the next problem bubbles up over here. The question is, how do we, across all of these agencies, it's that game, it's that whack-a-mole,
whack-a-mole,
it's that whack-a-mole game where, of course, now we have a new solution and we put in place a new policy. What if we actually had the ability to, on an ongoing basis, to assess, right, the efficiency and effectiveness of every agency, and it wasn't some audit or some political vendetta, to try to call out people, but it was in service of trying to get better and deliver better value for our citizens, and you had a flow of information. So you would think something like legal matters across across the entire state government would be something you would have a dashboard that the chief counsel's office would have visibility to all of those things. But you know as well as I do, the ability to get that information to flow across agencies and to have visibility to what that looks like, right, is no easy task. You could say after the fact.
But you could say that I can go check in on the court system's website, the new one, which is not very good.
Right.
But I can go and see all the lawsuits that Health and Human Services is facing, and I could see all the ones that that one staff attorney, Herzian, had. It was 100. There's 126 of them.
Yep.
This is not this is not UHIP. This is not a $500 million technology. This might be a Google Doc.
Well, I mean, I don't know the answer to this question. I don't remember seeing this when I was in state government, but ask Michael DiBiase whether he has visibility to all the legal matters, that are happening across state government. I'm guessing he doesn't.
He doesn't.
Right? So I'm guessing he's dependent on each agency, the legal counselor's support, whether it's outside or inside, depending on the size of the agency, to manage the portfolio of legal matters that they have.
And this wasn't a $100,000 lost lawsuit. This was a $24 million.
Well, so the bigger ones should bubble up. But the truth is there's probably no system. So you're dependent on the talent that you have, and if you get one bad apple, right, I'm sure we'll find out more, but it looks like you had somebody who was incompetent in this role, right? And you're dependent on that person, right, to be able to manage that portfolio of legal matters or substitute any other aspect of government you want, as opposed to the ability to see these things happening across the enterprise. That requires the investment in systems and information flow, and that requires investment into those capabilities. And when you're in a tight budget year, how do you justify putting in place those systems? And then when we do put in a big system, then we have the discussion about UHIP, where we don't go about systems building, right? We don't leverage applications in the clouds. We try to design the system locally.
Right.
Now, don't you think every state government has the same challenge of having visibility to legal matters across the state government? Right. I guarantee you that there's a solution out there.
Some states got a great system for tracking every lawsuit. 100%.
And we should be more inclined to look for those types of solutions and leverage them. And then, my argument is we should, on some issues, we should be the innovator to create the solution, and then everyone should be looking to us to say, how do we get at that capability?
And by the way, if there's no state government, there's enough major law firms in the country that are tracking tens of thousands of lawsuits for their clients.
Right.
Let's jump over to story came out today on jump over to Amazon. Amazon's now, finally, or in a more significant way, linking their Amazon Prime to Whole Foods.
Right.
I think we were probably here about a year ago talking about this is what's going to come next. And Rhode Island is not one of the first 10 markets, but we'll see how they do in their first 10 markets. What's your thought on how they're starting to build out this merger and what the implications are of it?
So we said when we first learned of this, I always thought it was a really strategic move, that ultimately you would see them take capabilities and what they know how to do and move them in an integrated way into Whole Foods. So it's not just competing based on your either bricks and mortar or your online. It's now, how do we combine that experience? Sometimes you want to go shopping and physically see the goods. Other times you want to have them shipped to you, directly, from an online platform, and people are going to migrate to different models.
Right.
They're going to be amazing at experimenting with those models, right? So we knew all along they were going to take the Prime product from online and move it into the goods that you can go purchase at a Whole Foods, and now they're rolling that out. Right. And so today they came out with a list of states that are going to get it, but everyone's going to get it. It's going to be,
if it works. course.
It's gonna be everywhere. The thing is, we in Rhode Island want to be positioned as the place where innovation happens, right? The reason that we don't make it to the middle of the list, is because then they've already decided that they're moving it forward, and then size matters, right? They want to go to bigger markets than just the Rhode Island market. The place where we have an advantage that we need to pitch, right, is at the beginning when we say, look, it's a small market, you should be exploring how this works here, and then you should be off to the races across the rest of the network and across the country. We need to sell Rhode Island as that unique place for innovation at scale, and we need to be going to the headquarters of all of these companies and saying, Rhode Island should be the test bed. You should be playing with these new capabilities. You should be exploring it. Rhode Islanders will get access to the benefit of that sooner rather than later, and then those solutions tend to get developed here, right? And then there's going to be a whole ecosystem around putting those solutions together. It's going to be really good for our economy, right? But it's no good for us if we're in the middle of the pack. You have to be the innovator. You have to be up front.
You need to be the test lab.
This is how we should have positioned, when we went after Amazon in the first place, and now here's a great example of it, right? So now they're in the position of experimenting with a new capability in a Whole Foods, leveraging their online presence. We should have been aggressively trying to position Rhode Island and their Whole Foods here as the place to test that. Not because we have the biggest market, but we can help them get to customer value faster.
What's it mean, though? Let's say this really takes off, right? This could be the next real big iteration of what Amazon's been able to accomplish. This thing starts to roll out, they begin to expand. The implications for those not innovating is devastating.
Right. So now look at it either way. You're a bricks and mortar, grocery store.
Correct.
You're falling further and further behind if you're not already. Right now, you've got this incredible new set of offerings, access to discounts around these products, blended models, online, offline. Even if you're an online retailer, now they have the bricks and mortar.
Absolutely.
So this is Amazon staying out ahead of the competition, being what I call a market maker, not a share taker of the way it works today, but making new markets, right? And they're just getting started. This isn't the next big wave. This is a continual wave of improvement, new models, adding more customer value. And if you try to compete with that and think you're going to be able to play it old school, right, and it's going to go away, it is not going away.
Supermarkets used to compete with each other on some products and also on some price points, right? So Stop and Shop bought East Side Marketplace. We'll go right up on the east side of Providence. There's two Whole Foods on either side of the east side of Providence. There's one East Side Marketplace is now a Stop and Shop. And then there's another Stop and Shop close by as well. This just creates massive separation. We're not fighting about price of blueberries or how many different flavors of salad dressing. We're talking about a complete transformation.
And if this plays out and Whole Foods gets it right, where now they've got us hooked on Amazon Prime and going to Whole Foods, now it's not the way it is today where I might order online, but then when I go pick what store I want. Once you get hooked in that system, you're going to go to Whole Foods or you're going to order from Amazon Prime, and then there's going to be real incentives for you to continue to go to Whole Foods rather than go shop somewhere else, right? And they're going to keep ratcheting up the customer value, convenience, different options, different ways to get at not just the actual products we buy in the supermarket, but you're going to see them move more towards solutions, right? How do I help you with meals and menus? How do I tie to healthcare and diets and all of the things they're going to be able to do with real-time information about you as a family and you as a customer? They just keep raising the bar, and if you're in that business and you're not constantly experimenting with these new models, you get more and more behind and less relevant to what's happening in the marketplace. things. It has huge impact for us, not just as customers, but it has impact for us as employees of these organizations, you know, where you see more and more of them go out of business, like we've seen some here in Rhode Island. So it costs us not just consumer convenience, but it costs us jobs.
There's also a data factor, right? Amazon's now going to have more data about all of us on almost every aspect of our life. And you know, we've just gone through about a 3-month period of really examining social media and what social media knows about each of us. There's been much less discussion about what Amazon knows about each of us. They've avoided that whole discussion, but Amazon knows everything we've ordered from them in the past. They own a bunch of data about us. They know a bunch of our behavior. Now they're going to know a whole nother level of information about us.
Add Alexa to that,
right?
You know, like we have Alexa sitting there at home. You know, let's just assume they're only listening when I ask her to listen. You know, there's
we've now
debate about whether Alexa's listening when she's not supposed to be. But imagine all that information. Now they know what news I like. They know what music I like to play, because they've made it incredibly convenient for me to use voice activation, you know, to get at that, you know, using Alexa at home, and it's all tied to that, right? So again, this is just it's all about customer experience. It's all about experimenting all the time. This is the secret, you know, to what Amazon is doing, right? They keep trying more stuff to see what works, what adds value, what consumers like, right? And then as soon as they get onto it, then they make it better and they scale it, right? Whereas most enterprises are stuck like deers in the headlight. They don't experiment with anything.
Right.
They think they're going to wait until this happens and then they're going to copy it. It's way too late for that. You've got to be exploring all the time.
And will anybody be able to catch up? I mean, that's really the question. Can anybody begin to compete with them? I mean, certainly you've seen major corporations like Macy's close hundreds of stores in an effort to retool to become much more digital. But the distance is ever growing, the difference. The amount of data, the amount of the relationship, the fact that, listen, I don't pay Macy's anything. I'm happy to pay. And it just went up. Went up from $99 to $119. Went up 20%. No one batted an eye. They've got 100 million Prime users. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's there's very few relationships that business.
They're delivering that much value that it's
$20.
You want to raise your prices. You have to raise your prices because you're delivering more value, right? The days of protecting your market and being able to raise prices because there's no competition, right? Those days are over, right? And so now you better play offense in doing this. Are they too big? I think that they're awfully big. It's really hard to compete with them. You better go back to basics. You better be delivering something that Amazon can't. You better be delivering better local service, you know, than they can, that people are willing to pay for. Because the days of you going into a store to buy something, the same thing that you could buy, you know, from Amazon, and paying a premium for it just because they're local, right? I mean, there may be a few people are going to do that, but most people I know, if it's the same product, if they don't differentiate the product and service, you know, those days are done. And there's a lot of stress in these markets right now. And this same thing is not just happening in retail, not just in supermarkets, not just in other retail. We see this in business after business and industry after industry.
Let's go over to our last segment, our favorite subject, Biff. We're just, we're like 90 days away, 85 days away.
We're just talking about that in the office.
Is there panic? Is there any anxiety? Is there any panic?
I wouldn't say panic. I would say,
Alexa, help us schedule the rest of.
But crunch time, which is fun for us because it really is one time. We work on lots of projects over the course of the year, but this is the one project that everybody has a role in at Biff. So I really like it for that because we all show up together, right? And we all show up and we're really proud of the experience and the people that are attracted to it. Yeah, so yeah, it is crunch time. Today we added another storyteller. This is a fun time for the storyteller list because we're very careful because we only have a few slots, that we're trying to orchestrate here. But today we added a guy by the name of Ken Falk. This guy's 21 years in the military. He was a naval officer. This guy worked in the space. These folks who take that work in the explosives ordnance area. They go in, this is the most stressful thing I could even imagine, like going into a field, where there's ordnance that could explode, and they work this. Well, this guy became a national expert in this area of post-traumatic stress and models for how to deal with that. He's a national leader in this. He wrote a book called Struggle Well. I love this title. And his message and the story he tells is incredibly important and relevant in the military, and post-traumatic stress syndrome area, but it's the same concept of anybody who's dealing with this kind of stress and trying to figure out how to optimistically grow out of it, and he's going to share an amazing story September 13th and 14th at the summit this year. So the curation of the storytellers is fun, and people are signing up for the summit. We're right on track for where we want to be. We sell out every year, as you know.
Absolutely.
And we're getting excited about it.
Do you, in these final weeks, start to react to anything like Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain committing suicide in the same week? Does that spark an internal discussion, or do you have to force yourself to remove yourself from any particular one news event that takes place?
No, we do this every day, not just for the summit, but we do this every day because we're thinking about, and like we really believe that it's not tweaking the way things work today. So in this area, mental health and well-being,
which you've done a lot of,
which
you've had a lot of storytellers over the years.
This is a classic case of, boy, do we need innovation, not in everything from our mindset and how we think about it, but when you start talking about the models and systems for the way we recognize, diagnose, and treat and rally around and support, people, with mental health problems, right? We've got so far to go in this country around that. So as it relates to the summit, we're constantly looking at, do we have the right mix of stories that point us towards the issues that we're all dealing with every day, but the common theme through this is, how do you approach it in an optimistic way? How do you approach these problems as a systems challenge that require a system solution? And we love to hear from people on the ground that are dealing with these things, have incredibly inspiring approaches, and are making real progress. And we learn as much from their struggles, and the obstacles that they're trying to deal with and how they deal with them, as we are the celebration of the success that they're having, and trying to rally around them. It really is about innovation in a very human-centered way, right? And it's a celebration of that, and I think that's a lot of why the summit, has as much, buzz about it, and people are so excited about it.
Such an interesting series of events, sad obviously in many ways, but also the impact that the end of their lives have happened. Kate Spade seemed to be one. Anthony Bourdain on top of Kate Spade, and just because of his force of persona, just has, it happened on Friday. We're still talking about it. This never happens anymore in our news cycle. 4 days later, and it's the dominant issue, and it doesn't look like there's any end in sight about really thinking and talking about the impact of both these deaths, but especially Anthony Bourdain's, what the impact is.
No, well, it had a big impact on me. I always say innovation junkies skew foodie, right? We love the whole notion of food and combining and recombining ingredients, and who more than Anthony, brought us all around the world, in a way that in a story that we could see ourselves in, enjoying food and people that were serving it.
And also we celebrate that he went to hell and back. And maybe he never came back, and we don't know.
Absolutely amazing. But to me, the real issue there, is about that we've got so much work to do in mental health and well-being. We just have to pay more attention. I saw some statistics on suicide rates, right? And so these are the iconic.
We broke it down a little bit, because I think there was actually a little bit of a misnomer. from 1999 to now, it was a 34% increase.
Right.
But in the last 3 years,
Yep.
it actually has decreased in many states.
The rate.
The rate,
Yeah.
the per capita rate.
Right.
So yes, in the
Right.
macro sense, but there's also some good signs
Yeah.
in the short term.
But it's still, I saw the last public data. I don't
Yeah.
know where
It was CDC.
It was CDC data. You're right. It was several years old. So I didn't see the more recent data. But whatever that percentage is, it's still way too high.
Oh, yeah.
We still don't pay anywhere near enough attention to it. And so yeah, we had a couple of iconic cases this week. And if that serves to get us to focus on this challenge,
absolutely.
And to understand that we need to look at it differently, right? Because you get sick and tired of looking at it in the rearview mirror.
Absolutely.
Like we got to change this.
As always, Mr. Innovation, great discussion. We talked about everything from state government to Amazon and Whole Foods to BIF, and a little bit on mental health.
Yes,
I thank you,
that's
as
right.
always, for being on Mondays. Tomorrow, a very complicated day at GoLocal Live. There's budget briefings, there's this, there's that. Kate Nagel will have the helm, and it's just a crazy week all around with sort of the end of the Rhode Island General Assembly. Look forward to having everybody back tomorrow afternoon. Thanks for tuning in to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center and our friends at Deepwater Wind for helping out. We'll see you tomorrow on GoLocal Live. Thank you.